Hi, I'm Jeff Murrow. I want to welcome you to True Texas History. I'm glad that you're here with me today. I decided to go ahead and do this presentation about disinformation and questions about John Wesley Hardin after having visited his grave and doing a little bit of research. Because one of the things that I discovered and taking a closer look is that many of the accounts about John Wesley Hardin and his life either present untrue pictures or leave out some key information about the man that will help you understand. From some of this, for lack of a better term, let's just go ahead and say propaganda or disinformation on John Wesley Hardin. They talk about how he lived a majority of his life in jail. Not true. And they present him as, this dangerous outlaw. I mean, granted, he was a dangerous person, but those were dangerous times. And I don't know how well most of the people in the 21st century can understand the times in which he lived and all the disinformation. And they often leave out a lot of his life there in Gonzales, Texas. Now, having some connection with Gonzales, Texas, it's almost like a slap in the face that they leave this part out. Now, I'm hoping to go ahead and fill in a few holes. This is by no means an in-depth everything there is to know about John Wesley Hardin. Now, fortunately, John Wesley Hardin did write an autobiography that you can pick up a copy of and read. Now, John Wesley Hardin was born in 1853. He was born to a pastor, and there were times that he assisted his father in running the local school and teaching people. John Wesley Hardin was well versed in Scripture. Throughout his life, there were episodes that he would have bouts where he would just be spouting Scripture because he knew it from memory. I mean, you see the character in Pulp Fiction that goes around quoting Scripture and then kills people. In some ways, that was a John Wesley Hardin type of person who could do that, but not totally. Now, John Wesley Hardin did have a rough life after an episode where he had killed a fella when he was young. I believe he was 14 or 15. Then he was on the run from the Texas Freedmen's Bureau and the Texas State Police because he knew he would not stand a chance of getting a fair trial in Texas along the way. Reports vary whether he killed one Union soldier or 4 Union soldiers, but either way, he killed several Union troops when he was going around hiding from the authorities. He did eventually end up in Gonzales, Texas, and it was there that he started learning how to gamble and also went on several cattle drives. Now, my suspicion is that on cattle drives, he started developing his gun skills. He was known for the little spin and the gun show. Some people call it the curly bill spin. I don't know if there's an official name for it. But he developed that, and he became very adept at his gun skills. This is one of the things about John Wesley Hardin. As a person very familiar with gunplay, he paid a lot of attention to the technological advances over the years, and he kept up with the guns and the different styles of guns, how fast they operated, because it was during his lifetime they went from single action to double action. And if you're a gun person, you understand that. If you're a non-gun person, essentially there were some technological advances that allowed guns to fire faster. Now, another innovation of John Wesley Hardin that you don't hear much about, he was not one of those people who wore his guns on his hips. Instead, he wore shoulder holsters and had the guns, the handles toward the inside. He felt like he could draw faster with the guns positioned like that. And after some incidents on the trail drives, he ended up getting caught up in the Sutton-Taylor feud. Now, the Sutton-Taylor feud, I would need to do a whole episode on because it becomes very confusing. The synopsis of it is the Suttons were very involved, very pro-Reconstruction. The Taylors were anti-Reconstruction. And John Wesley Hardin aligned himself with the Taylors. He was very outspoken in terms of being against Reconstruction and many of the Reconstruction policies. Now, one of the players in the Sutton-Taylor feud was former state police captain, and some sources have him as a county sheriff. I am not exactly sure what his position was. His name was Jack Helm. He was a former Confederate who turned around and started working for the state police. Now, the state police were known to be a very corrupt organization, and Jack Helm was very involved in the TaylorSutton Feud, and he ended up getting killed by John Wesley Hardin during that time. Now, after killing Jack Helm, he spent some time on the run and in various places. And eventually there was a shootout where he ended up killing a Brown County deputy. And that's the one that he got into trouble for. Now, along the way, he spent 2 little episodes in jail. One of them, he was in the Cherokee County jail, and had been captured. He broke out of the Cherokee County jail, got into trouble again, and at that point, I believe he was wounded with a shotgun blast, thought he was going to die. He agreed to surrender to the authorities only if he could be in the surrender to the Gonzales County Sheriff, which he did, and he was put into the Gonzales County jail. Now, while he was in the Gonzales County jail, he was there for having killed one of the local drunks, and he broke out of the jail. Now, there's some debate as to whether or not his breaking out of the jail was arranged or whether he did it on his own. It is clear that he had a saw, and the local authorities didn't chase him down after that because they considered the drunk guy that he killed kind of a nuisance in the town. It was only when he had the gunfight and he killed the sheriff from another town, from Brown County, that he got in trouble and the Texas Rangers hunted him down. Now, even in the hunting down of John Wesley Hardin, the Texas Rangers caught up to him on a train headed toward Pensacola. Now, it just so happened that when he was on the train, the Texas Ranger pulled on him, cocked a gun, and John Wesley Hardin said, "Texas, by God," because he knew the sound of a Colt gun, and he knew that that was not something that other law enforcement tended to have. Now, it was quite gutsy of the Texas Ranger to be outside of his territory, to be hunting somebody down in Florida. The Ranger had the foresight of going ahead and deputizing some of the Florida law enforcement people in his operation. There ended up being a big gunfight, and on the train, John Wesley Hardin ended up getting pistol whipped and beaten, and so he was taken for trial and eventually served time in prison. His time in prison ended up being, I believe, like 14 years, and he was eventually pardoned. Now, one of the questions I had, here's this man who had killed Union soldiers, had killed people in barroom fights, had killed people on the trail, and he was only tried for this one sheriff. Now, in each of these cases, what John Wesley Hardin pointed out is that one, he always maintained that he never killed anybody that didn't need killing. And number two, he saw to it that whenever there was a gunfight, that he would literally get the drop on people. He would draw faster than them, even though they may have initiated the draw. Because part of his defense in many of the situations were that people drew on him. And he definitely would get people to go ahead and draw on him. It just so happened that when he did start going through the whole draw process, he was much faster than the other person. Just keep in mind, he had practiced a lot of his gun skills, and when he was on those cattle drives, Wild Bill Hickok was going to go ahead and take him in, but he managed to get the drop on Hickok, and Hickok backed off. So, because nobody wants to go ahead and be the first person to die. Now, when he was in jail, it was interesting. Of course, he was always trying to escape, which is not surprising. He was also the Sunday school teacher there in prison. And because remember, he had been raised spouting scripture and knowing things. He actually viewed himself as a pillar of the community. He did not see himself as a bad guy. And many people didn't see him as a bad guy. Because keep in mind, he was pardoned. He was not serving a life sentence. And, had the people of that time viewed him as this terrible scourge of society and total bad guy, you would have thought, well, why wouldn't they have gone ahead and pressed more charges against him or had him serve time in jail longer? Good questions. These are things that you need to consider, because when you read a lot of the Old West stories, a lot of times we go, he killed over 30 people, which is true. You just automatically assume that he was a bad guy without looking at the context in which he lived. And with John Wesley Hardin, he is definitely somebody that you need to consider that with. Now, John Wesley Hardin was married. He did have a wife and two sons. Actually, he ended up having two wives because his first wife died, and so he ended up marrying another woman. Now, there's still some controversy concerning how he died. Now, he had after he got out of prison, because while he was in prison, he did go ahead and do some self-study and became a lawyer, and set up his first office there in Gonzales, Texas, so that he could be with his family. From there, he went ahead and moved out to El Paso. Now, the stories vary concerning his death. He was enlisted to go ahead and defend a criminal on some murder charges. He was known for his gunplay skills. The local law enforcement were on edge. In fact, they had snipers set up in town waiting for John Wesley Hardin, the event that he came to town. John Wesley Hardin had the foresight of going ahead and arranging with the local sheriff. Let's see, what did they call it? I can't find the word for it right now, but safe passage, that it is. He arranged for the promise of safe passage as he was going to represent this criminal in town. Now, some of the deputy sheriffs and constables, the people under the sheriff, were not of the same mind. and it was one of them that ended up shooting John Wesley Hardin in the bar. John Wesley was at the end of the bar shooting dice with one of the patrons, and that sheriff came up and first shot went to the head. Of course, the back of the head. John Wesley went down, and then he plugged him 2 more times in the body. Now, ironically, that sheriff ended up, that deputy or constable ended up dying in an altercation later and was buried in an unmarked grave in that same graveyard to an anonymous death there. Now, some of the stories about John Wesley Hardin, they say, well, he was involved with one of the prostitutes in town, and that's what led to his demise. Well, I don't know about that. I do know that he had been enlisted as a lawyer to defend someone. He had made arrangements to have legal protection while he was in town, and that was not respected. If we put it in modern terms, you could say suicide via police in terms of his cause of death. He did not intentionally try to go ahead and be killed. He did not draw on anyone. He was just shot while he was in a bar participating in a gambling game. But this will give you some idea of John Wesley Hardin and his times. If people had seen him as a total bad guy at that time, he would have served more time in jail or ended up under some other circumstances. It's also interesting to note that when he was serving time in prison, his cellmate was none other than Johnny Ringo. I mentioned that in the Johnny Ringo video, which I hope you see. John Wesley Hardin also found the circumstances of Johnny Ringo's death highly questionable, and he asked a lot of questions about that, and some of the powers that be did not like him asking those questions. So this will give you some things to think about concerning John Wesley Hardin. I hope that you enjoyed it. I have enjoyed learning more about him and realize that things are not quite so cut and dried as they would have you believe in some of the Old West stories and magazines that you pick up. So until next time, this is Jeff Murrah wishing you vaya con Dios, my friends. Goodbye.